Time to get this Hydra power unit back together. I have got my seal kit. Includes nut. 165 475 AS is the seal kit number, and that has everything you need and then some, because there's variations on the design of these over the years. So the gaskets changed and some O-rings and stuff. But it's just cheaper for them overall to put it all in one kit than to either come up with a couple of different kits or try to order everything separately. The book has us do things in sub-assemblies, and that's the way I'm going to do it. It's kind of the easiest way to do it. So we're going to start with the tail shaft assembly, output shaft, right there, along with the housing. What I'll do is I'll put it together without the seal in, and that way I don't have seal drag and can check it out. And then once I got the bearing preload and the right number of shims, I will take it back apart, put the seal in, and finish assembling it. I'm gonna start with a spacer. It is actually directional. There's a part of the inside that's turned down so that where the shoulder for the bearing is, it sits up on that so it presses against the bearing itself, but doesn't ride loose back here. We'll just start with the number of shims that were in it before. It didn't seem too bad, but we'll start there. Then we just have to stick it through. Slide the other bearing in and put the sprocket on the back and tighten up the nut and see how the preload is. So I'll do that. I got a piece of old round baler belt in there to protect the shaft while it's in the vise. Torque that nut down, and she turns nice and free. I cannot feel any end play by hand. They call for a 1/1000th end play or 5 inch-pounds of torque to turn the shaft in the bearing, which is almost nothing, which I'm turning the bearing and the housing on the shaft instead of the other way around. The thinnest shim is 4/1000ths. So I think if I take a shim out, it's going to start getting tight, and obviously if I put one in, I might start getting some end play. So we're going to leave her there. So now I need to spin the nut back off so I can get the gear out and drive the new seal in, put the O-ring on the shaft, and then I can put the sprocket back on. I decided to reuse the sprocket. It does not, I was doing some comparison, it has very little wear on it. I'm just gonna go with a new chain and put the sprocket back in. Well, if you're wondering what seal comes with the seal kit for the output, it's a CR5411557. Seal is installed. I left the bearing in there because it's kind of hard to get it in after the seal's in. Put some grease on the seal just so the lip's got some lubrication for that initial run. So we're ready to stick this on here. Before we put the sprocket on, we got to get the O-ring on. And I might have to put the sprocket on just to push that bearing up ahead a little more. Oop, stay there so that the O-ring groove shows. There it is. Get the O-ring on there that was in the kit, and walk that on there with the trusty O-ring pick. There, got the O-ring to pop down in its groove. It sits in this smooth spot just ahead of the splines on the sprocket here. Keeps oil from walking up the splines. The seal keeps the oil from coming out the outer part. So don't want to forget that O-ring. And from there, it's just a matter of putting that on. And as I said in the disassembly video, you can do this from the outside with the if you just want to change the rear seal on it, don't want to tear into one that far, Get the nut off, pull that sprocket. You can pull the seal. It'd be a good idea to change the O-ring. It's cheap. And if there's much of any wear in your sprocket, might not be a bad idea to change that too. I guess it just kind of depends on what you're going to do with the tractor in the future. If it's just going to drive in parades, you might be able to get away with an old sprocket. So now I just need to reef down on this and get it good and tight, and this sub-assembly is ready to go. If for some reason you have the old style output shaft that doesn't have the step to support the back of the bearing, you can't set your bearing preload until, see, I already can feel there's a lot more drag. Here I am getting distracted. More drag just because of the seal being in there. That's why I like to do it without the seal at first. But anyways, you have to put this in, and I'll cover it more when we get to the assembly, because the snap ring is what the bearing eventually pushes against. So everything has to be together before you can tighten this part down to set your bearing preload. I covered this in the disassembly video, but this is the spanner wrench. It's the ST149, which is the same as an SAE number 9 spanner wrench, and I'll put a link below where you can get one from Maple Springs Farms, and it's 1/2 inch drive instead of having to use that, so you can actually get a torque wrench on it or something like that. It's a lot handier, but this is the original one that Oliver issued for it. Just got the tabs in the right place to engage. So now that that's done, just need to stake this lip right here down into that groove so the nut can't come loose, and it's done. Next assembly is going to be the clutch pack spider. First thing we have to do is get the piston back in with the new seals. Here's that clipping sealing ring. See how it's locked together now, and I dropped it. See how it's locked together, and a little squeeze and push in the right direction, and it unlocks. So that goes in this groove here. There may be some variations on that depending on your age. You might have a quad ring, but you work it down in there, then you have to squeeze and get 1/2 to, oh, I got it already. This one ain't too bad. Ones in an over and under can be kind of a bear. If you squeeze the one end in, yep, see, I got it unhooked. So I bring my thumb around here, get that in there. Like I say, that's a very brittle ring, so be careful. Don't force it. Take your time. Let's see. So now we got the piston, and it has this large, basically, it looks like a snap ring, but it's got square ends. It's the largest ring that's going to be in the kit. Just got to get it in this groove here. Yeah, man. There we go. And now I'll put a little grease on to lube these so that they don't fight while I'm going together. I'm trying to remember if some of the late Hydra powers have a Teflon seal in place of this large snap ring. The majority are going to be like this. Then you just got to get it to slide in there. Got that side started. Run it a little cockeyed. There we go. Center isn't sprung out so much, so it doesn't usually take as much gumption to get her done. Then we put the spring on, and then the retainer disc, and I got the new snap ring out of the seal kit. The old one was kind of stretched, so we definitely want to use that new snap ring. Now we need to go over the press and push her back down to get it together. Got my homemade tool that I made in the last one to push it apart. use it to go back together. Just got to squeeze this spring down. I might need to be a little more centered up than that. There it goes. It doesn't take a lot of force. Get in there. Hey, man. Just gotta love those style of snap rings. We'll slowly let it up, make sure it's seated all right. Yeah, it looks like I got her. Or it wouldn't fit down in the hole. Okay, we're gonna load the clutch packs in. Clutch discs. I'm reusing the old ones because they were in real good shape. So you start with one of this style, the friction disc. Put that in. Since these are used, they're already old oil soaked, but if I was putting in brand new ones, I'd put a little oil between each layer to pre-lube them or soak them a little ahead of time. Like I said in the disassembly video, you want to make sure these things are flat, and if they slip a bunch, they'll heat up and then they'll warp in a disc shape, and then they drag, and then they wear even faster. So you don't want to put warped ones in. So it's just putting them on something that's a good flat surface and make sure they're touching all the way around. Flip them over, try them the other way. You'll usually see if they're not. So we got a driven one, we do a separator. We do a driven one, there's 6 drivers and 5 separators. And there's the last driven. Then we take our clutch piston hub, line up the holes, and set it down on there, get the bolts and the locking tabs and put it together. Book calls for 15 foot-pounds of torque. There, got those all torqued. All these tabs are for, the kit comes with new ones. Locking tabs, just keep bolts from coming well, too loose. Knock all those over to keep the bolts tight. Got those peened over. Now I need to get the sealing rings on here for the collector ring. Once again, the sealing rings have square ends, whereas the snap rings have angled ends. This is our collector ring. If you'll notice, it says front. It means it goes towards the front of the tractor. As I mentioned in the disassembly video, you want this to be as smooth as possible, no grooves worn in it. I don't think this part is available anymore. So if you do have some wear in here, your best bet's probably take this to a machine shop. They can bore it out and then drive a sleeve in here. You have to make sure there's a hole there for the oil pressure to come through. But this one appears in good shape. It does have a little bit of wear up here where the O-ring seals on the outer part. But other than that, good shape. So we'll slide it down on there to try to squeeze those snap rings in as I do. Once again, making sure front faces the front. Okay, front is facing down in this case. There we go. first ring on. Get it on there a little crooked. Kind of keep working my way around. And there, it is on. So that assembly is done. Now I should be able to, right now, you can see the clutch discs turn freely. And that's when you're in underdrive, there's no pressure to this. The input shaft drives these steel plates, and then the driven plates drive the drum. So when hydraulic pressure is put to it, which we will simulate with air pressure, it squeezes them all together so tight that these plates have to drive the, oh, of course the air compressor kicks on. As I said before, I so rudely interrupted. Put some air to it. You can see the piston go up and down. Switch it this way because it was easier to hold the air gun. But as you can see, hopefully you can see, the steel discs that are driven by the input shaft turn freely, put pressure to it. They all squeeze together. So the drive is transferred from these discs to the driven discs, which drive this spider, which is splined to the output shaft, so you have direct drive. So if something ain't working in direct drive, there's a few things that can cause it. You're not getting enough pressure to do that. These friction discs are worn out and smooth, and so it just can't grab good enough to push the tractor. These seals are worn in the collector ring shot, something in the side cover that's not giving you enough pressure. A few different things that can go wrong. That assembly is now ready. We'll move on to the next one. Next up is the side cover. I am going to do the lube circuit pressure control valve first, just because when the high pressure valve's in, it makes it a little tougher to get to. So should have the doohickey on the end of the spring. That end goes in, the spring gets fatter on the outside. Then it's just a pipe plug. Put your favorite pipe sealant on there. And I will do that, and then screw it in and tighten it down. Then we'll do the high pressure circuit. The spool goes in. As it was showed in the disassembly one, just use a bolt, 5/16 bolt threaded into it to get it out. Push it all the way in with the bolt. This spring doesn't matter which way it goes in. And then you got the cap. Seal kit comes with a new copper crush washer. I'll put the camera down because I think I'm going to need both hands to push that in and turn it. If there were any shims in there, you'll want to get them too. Sometimes a little dab of grease on the cap, put a shim on there, another little dab of grease that kind of keeps them from falling off while you're doing it, or the side cover side down so that your shims are, gravity's holding them in place, and then push down. And am I going to get it? Next I'm going to put the shift spool in. I've already got the new O-ring on it. That one was pretty obvious which one it was, especially if you take the old one off and hold it up to the O-rings in the seal kit. Yeah, it's dry in there from me cleaning it out. Put a little lube on it. And the notch will be going towards the bottom. I mean, it's round, so it can spin around 360 degrees, but push that in there. Then we get our detent ball. Drop it in there. The detent spring. Drop that in there. And then if you still got the original hex socket, Allen screw type, it's a pipe plug, 1/8 inch pipe thread. So you'll want to put some pipe sealant on that. You might want to substitute for something that's a little easier to get on like this. I've already got the pump bolted back together. Just need to mount it on. As you'll see in the disassembly video, I took it apart and inspected everything, seemed to be good. Washed it up, just make sure everything goes back to where it was, because you could possibly put the drive gear on the wrong side. It needs to be towards the back and on the lower shaft. And other than that, she turns free, torque all the bolts, and we're ready to put it on the housing. I got the brand new gasket from the seal kit. Okay, let's see. The oil pressure spring and spooler in, the high pressure spring and spooler in, shifting spool and the shift detent are in. I'm leaving this plug here out because I'm going to put my test gauge on that when I test the unit. I've got an O-ring in here for where the collector ring comes through the side cover, brand new one. And the pump is on and turns nicely. So the side cover is now done and ready for assembly. The input shaft bearing seems to be in really good shape, so I'm not going to mess with it. The only other thing on the input shaft to be concerned with, I already pulled it out, but a seal goes in here where the output shaft goes in there. And it is this one. It was in the kit, even in an AGCO bag. The 101 678A, which is also a national 486 or 481616. Yeah, sure, why not? And this one has no sealing goop, but we will want it. I will put sealing stuff on it because it's bare metal. We want it like that, the lip facing out, spring side facing up towards the back, because we're trying to keep the oil from going that way. So just need to find an appropriate driver. I'll put some sealant stuff on that and drive that baby in. Seal is installed, so this shaft's ready to go. Time for the counter shaft. On these, the rear gear is blind in. There's a reason some of these gears are separate. Oliver offered a creeper gear that was not a power shift, just a creeper gear that you had to stop and shift down, and it used the same case and some of the same shafts as a Hydra power drive, and then they could just swap out gears for different ratios, or to use it to make a Hydra power or a creeper gear. So this is the end where the Sprag Clutch goes. First thing is this thrust bearing, and you can see it's got just a little bit of wear. I think the two sides are the same, but I can see that one was against that. Then we've got the next thing that goes on is the Sprag Clutch. And if you want to order one, that's the part number 3309-9539. And this is what you'll get. We saw it when we were taking apart. And here's how it works, is all these little wedges kind of floating there when it's going one way in the overrunning direction, and then they'll turn and lock when it goes in the other direction. And so you got to be careful sticking it on, because you got what's called drag strips, these little copper looking plates on the inside. They're not very thick or big, and all they do is provide enough friction so this inner ring gets some drag from the shaft it's sitting on, so that when the speeds match up, it makes sure it makes these wedges lean the right way. And then there's the same thing on the outside. These outer drag strips, they provide friction with the gear that sits over it. And kind of hard to see here, but kind of makes everything work. So these wedges can all be fine. The cage can all be fine. There's even a little spring thing in there that kind of keeps the two halves separate. But you break these drag strips, or they just break from years of wear, and one time it might grab, the next time it might not. And so usually that's what's going on there. So the end with these drag strips, the inner ones, go on first. And so you want to be careful, because they're kind of, once they're on there, they're spring loaded, so you don't want to just jam it on. You got to kind of work it on to get those drag strips too. Kind of hard to do one-handed, but there, I got it. So if you look, there's the rear, there's the front. That's which way those drag strips are facing. Because if you put it in backwards, things will not work right. Then we got to get the gear on. That is not directional. You want to make sure the inside's nice and smooth. You're going to see some, like this one has, you can kind of see a little bit of marking from all those wedges over the years. As long as there's no ledges that you can catch a fingernail or something like that on, it's going to be all right. As long as it's good and smooth. Like I say, if you can't catch a fingernail on it, it's smooth enough. If it's not, I'd look to find a used gear. I doubt you can get this gear anymore. Same with the shaft. But it does not take much wear for that Sprag clutch to start slipping. More so on an over and under unit, which that'll be another video down the road someday. So set this baby on here. And we just gotta kind of turn it in the direction it needs to go. Once again, this might be a little hard one-handed. And the phone's ringing. There it goes. That should be right, because the engine goes this way, so it wants to turn it that way. But it can freewheel that way. So we've got it. And we just put this other thrust bushing doohickey on here. And the counter shaft assembly is ready to go.